Hey everybody. In this episode, we talk a little about when things don't exactly go as planned. This could either be equipment failure or a mental error that hinders the original plan, or just plain bad luck.
Yep, like my evening canoe trip in the aftermath of a thunderstorm, when I ended up shivering in my boxers in a church parking lot. More on that if you listen ahead. And if you have a story where things didn't quite go as planned, feel free to leave us a comment and maybe we can read it on the show. Also, as always, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't done so yet to make sure you never miss an episode.
All right. Thanks for listening, and without further delay, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. I'm Pat Carroll, hunter, fisherman, and general outdoor enthusiast. Join me and my brother Mike as we share tactics, recount stories, and plan our upcoming outdoor adventures. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast, your home for stories and tactics in the woods and on the water. I'm Pat Carroll, and I'm joined as always by my brother and co-host Mike. How's it going, Mike?
It's going well. It's going well. Things are going well down here in Georgia, and it's been a good couple of weeks. So glad to be back on the podcast.
Nice. Yeah, no, definitely excited as well. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, when things don't exactly go as planned. Either whether it be an equipment failure or a mental error that goes against what you were originally planning. Sometimes it's good to talk a little bit about those things and then also see what we can learn from them as well. So I think this is going to be a pretty exciting one as well. But
Yeah,
oh
you
yeah,
know,
no.
for me, it almost seems as though this episode, like this is my golden era right here. Like when things don't go the way that you draw it up, like this, it almost feels like more often than not, things don't end up going the way that you draw it up. This, that, and the other always ends up coming up, and I think that that's part of the beauty and also part of the frustration of some outdoor sports. So I'm excited to get into it with you, Pat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But before we get into that, I figured, we could talk a little bit about where we are in social media. So we do have an Instagram. That Instagram is EC underscore hunt fish hike underscore pod. So follow us along there. Give us a follow. Like some of our comments, and along with that, please try and rate and review. So obviously giving us good ratings, reviewing the podcast is the best way to tell us how we're doing, how we can improve what we're doing, as well as move us up the charts and extend our reach to other listeners. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely go ahead and do that. But yeah, moving on forward, I figure we could talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the outside recently. So for me, haven't done a whole lot outside, done a little bit of playing out with the kids, whether it be on a scooter or on the bike. Starting to warm up here. We're up in the Northeast, so we're in that time of the season where it's still really cold in the mornings, 30s, 40s in the mornings, but it ultimately gets up to like the 50s in the afternoon, which for us is, relatively mild. So we got the opportunity to get outside, play on the swings, which is very nice. But kind of an outdoor adjacent activity that I've been doing is pulling together all the trail camera pictures that I got from over the winter and over the hunting season. So as you may or may not know, I usually put trail cams out and kind of let them soak for an extended period of time before I pull those cards and take a look at those pictures. And I've started to pull those pictures and start compiling that data, and it's starting to look pretty interesting. Uh, Lots of good deer on there, which is nice. Maybe not as any really big ones, but a lot of target deer, which is good. And as far as the data is concerned, kind of unsurprisingly, the areas that I ended up hunting a lot this past season, there weren't a lot of deer there. So it kind of just
Yeah.
goes to show that the cameras were picking up a lot of what I was seeing actually in the woods, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting. It starts to play with, am I responsible for how those deer are moving? Is it changing how Is me being in those spots impacting the movement of the deer, or does it just happen to be that I, didn't have the camera right in exactly the right spot to be able to pick those deer up? So, still trying to piece those pieces of the puzzle together, but working it out, and ultimately excited with the number of pictures I have, and excited to continue to pull that data together. But Mike, outdoor endeavors, what have you been up to?
Yeah, so for us, we kind of start off in the same place in terms of our temperatures in the mornings. It'll be upper 30s, lower 40s in the mornings here, but then for us, it doesn't get up to the like mid 50s. It doesn't even get up to the mid 60s. It's been getting up into like the mid 70s over the
Ooh,
course of the day. So it's this like huge, enormous discrepancy between the temperature in the morning and then what it is that you have kind of like in the afternoon, which with our two little ones, with our 6-month-old and with our 3-year-old, trying to dress them so that they're appropriately dressed in the morning when we're going in the car into school, and then also in the afternoons when it's like 75 degrees outside is pretty much next to impossible,
yeah,
for ourselves as well. It's just like this kind of crazy time. And the fall and the spring in Georgia, it's nice and long, which is great. But there's this enormous kind of difference between the temperatures in the morning and then the temperatures in the in the evenings or in the afternoons, and that does actually play a role in fishing too. Obviously, I've
hmm,
talked a lot on this podcast about kind of like water temperatures and what all of that can mean, and when you get stretches that are particularly warm versus particularly cool. But it does make one thing that I've found is it makes that kind of like that morning hour very, very important. But
yeah,
it's all neither here nor there. It's just a little bit about the weather that we've been having down in Atlanta, and it's been gorgeous. So part of what that's meant is we've been able to get out to some of the parks that are by us, been able to play a lot in the yard. We're fortunate enough to live on a street that's got a lot of really young families with kids that are all our kids' age. They've been out there like biking and scootering, and playing kind of like out in like the driveways, like sharing one another's scooters and bikes and stuff like that. So
nice.
that's been pretty fun. And then you were mentioning something that's kind of like outdoor adjacent. This past weekend, some of our listeners might know I run like I'm a swim coach, and I run a swim camp in the early weeks of the summer down here, and so kind of along those lines I was getting my lifeguard recertification.
Ooh,
So it wasn't necessarily outdoors. The pool was indeed indoors, but I had a chance to kind of like get into the pool, and there was kind of like a swim test like aspect of it, which I did fine with, needing to like tread without using your arms, which was the one part that was more difficult than I had remembered from former lifeguard recertifications. The swims I was fine with, the like rescues and everything I was fine with, but the treading without arms was not as easy as I
do
had
you
necessarily remembered.
do you remember how long you needed to tread water without arms?
It was like we swam like 6 or 8 laps, and then so like 150, 200, and
Hmm.
then we treaded like immediately into 2 minutes of treading without using your hands.
Okay.
So your options were kind of like elbows up or like hands in your armpits,
Mm,
and so I kind of like alternated between them in order to kind of like keep myself not entertained, but to kind of like keep myself mobile, I guess, if you
hmm.
will. And then like all of the rescues and everything, and the swimming with the brick, you might remember, Pat,
Hmm.
from your lifeguard
Oh
recertification.
yeah.
So that was probably 10 to 12 hours of like the in service like work in the pool, and there was 10 hours of an online course that went along with it as well. So it was
Ooh.
it was extensive, yeah. But I knocked it out in the weekend, so that was it wasn't necessarily outdoors, but it did kind of get me active a little bit, and anything that kind of gets you active. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Totally agree with that one. All right. So now we're going to get into some of these things that may have not have gone our way in the woods and on the water. Um I kind of bulked this into three kind of categories. Those categories I got are failures with equipment, we got mental errors, and then things that are outside of your control. So things that went wrong, but maybe it wasn't necessarily something that you did. that made them go wrong. So I figure we'll start with the failures of equipment first and kind of go from there.
Yeah.
So first off, for me, I think the first one that I can think of is failures with deer scents. So obviously there's different scents you can utilize in the woods. Predominantly for me, I'll use kind of like a doe estrus scent. And originally when I was first starting out, I kind of would take a little bit and put it on like a drag line and like drag that through the woods, kind of trying to replicate what like a deer would do. And I mean, I know a lot of folks do that and it works pretty well. But what I was doing was kind of reusing the same string or reusing the same, area that was used for scent. And what I realized is that, a deer, if the deer can pick up the difference between, me and you and, another deer or like specific types of food. I mean, these deer have really good noses. They can probably pick up the fact that the same scent line has been used for the last 3 or 4 hunts, right?
Yeah.
So I decided that probably wasn't the best idea to be utilizing the same scent wick for multiple hunts. And then I changed that and immediately started seeing a difference as far as the number of deer I was seeing. So definitely think that is one thing that I could have changed earlier to have a little bit more success early on. Along with the deer scent failures, I did have a quick little story to tell. So this was a few years ago. I was getting up into the tree, and what I like to do, utilizing the deer scent, is I'll climb up into the tree, get into my tree stand, and then utilize a couple little cotton balls. So I'll utilize the scent, put the scent on the cotton balls, and then kind of toss those out in different areas around the tree. What
Yeah,
this
that makes sense.
does is it puts a little bit of scent around the tree, and then and it's like it's in a bunch of different locations, kind of mimicking what a deer might do. And then after my hunt, I'll pick them up so that they're not littering in the woods. But in this particular instance, I got up into the tree. I got the cotton balls in my hand. I get a little bit of that scent on the cotton balls. And then what I did is I dropped the cap. Uh, so now I'm holding this, probably 3 or 4 ounce bottle of doe pee in my hand with no way of capping it. So I'm like, the options are right at this point. Well, climb down the tree in the dark in order to find this cap that's about the size
Oh
of a
no.
dime, that's black in the middle of woods and fallen leaves and stuff like that, or figure out another way to cap this and deal with it another way. So what I decided to do is I had a water bottle on the side of my bag that was not one of my favorites, but it was a water bottle nonetheless. And basically what I did is I dumped out the entirety of the water bottle, uh, took this dopey, dumped the dopey into the water bottle, capped it, put it in my bag, and then continued my hunt.
Yeah.
And then, when I was done with my hunt, I got down off the tree stand, climbed down. I did manage to find the little cap, which was nice. And then I just poured the dopey from the water bottle back into the little bottle that I had, put the little cap on, was none the wiser. Now, I did throw away the water
Yes.
bottle. Not something you want to do is utilize a water bottle that had dopey in it. But as far as working around and solving a problem, if we're talking about failures with equipment, that is
Yep.
definitely one that stands out in my mind.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I knew that our listeners at home would be wondering about what the status of the water bottle was in your repertoire
Yeah.
after having the deer piss in it. So,
Yep, that went
I'm
directly into the trash.
yes. Not even gonna try and do
No.
like a sanitation
Uh,
run in the
you
dishwasher
know,
there. No,
I, I I would never be able to look at it the same way.
yeah, no. And, like, you'd always just be, like, getting, like, little waftings
Yes.
of urine as you were taking your sip, so that was a losing battle from
Def
the jump for you.
Definitely don't wanna be having, essence of urine while you're drinking your water. That is definitely
Yeah.
not something that is enjoyable. Um,
Yeah.
but in addition to that, another one that comes into mind. I mean, I guess if I'm gonna recap from that first one, just be careful.
Recap, no pun
Be
intended.
careful with your scent caps if you're up in the tree and you're using
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
In addition to that, I had another equipment failure, and it's really not really the equipment's fault, more of just how I was handling it. But I was setting up a tree stand, right? So, for those folks who are less aware, right? I utilize hang-on stands. So generally speaking, the process is you set up your. I utilize climbing sticks. You generally use some sort of ladder mechanism to get up in the tree. So I'll, yeah, put my climbing sticks on the tree, climb up to, somewhere in that 15 to 20-foot range, and then you take the tree stand off your back, you utilize a strap in order to wrap it around the tree and get that tree stand hanging on there so you can take a seat. But in this particular instance, I was having trouble with a branch. I couldn't quite get the strap around, and what ended up happening was I dropped the tree stand out of the tree, which generally is a not a good move when you're trying to set up a tree stand for two reasons. One, I then had to climb back down the tree, which was less than ideal. And two, when I got down to the bottom of the tree and inspected the tree stand, I noticed that one of the welds on the tree stand had broken.
Oh
So
god.
that was not going to work for me.
Yep.
At that point, cursed under my breath a number of times and then decided, well, I'm not going to be hunting from a tree stand today. I'm going to have to hunt from the ground. So
Yeah.
found another spot, found another tree, hunted from the ground that day. Didn't end up seeing much, just the general squirrels, nothing too crazy. But did have to plan on purchasing another tree stand before I could get back in the woods, which was a little bit of a bummer, but you deal with it. You do what you can. Hunted from the ground a few times after that because I didn't have a tree stand, and it was okay, but no
Yeah.
real success in that front. So I guess as far as learnings from that one. Make sure your tree stand is secured properly before you
Yes.
start letting go and letting them fall out of the sky. But yeah, those are kind of my equipment failures. But Mike, what do you have as far as equipment failures?
Yeah, and I started this off by saying that that this is kind of like my heyday here. This is kind of like my sweet spot because I mean, I'm no there are times out on the water when I'm fishing and just like sometimes it's in the classroom, sometimes it's like in front of my kids where I just make like a fool of myself. And the fishing is certainly no exception to that. So for each of these there's like stories that go along with them, and I'm no stranger to the humbling experiences that come along when you kind of make a fool out of yourself. So the first that kind of like goes along with an equipment kind of not necessarily malfunction, but like equipment issues, is one of the actually I think it was the very first time I ever went trolling with the canoe. And so my in-laws have kind of I can't remember, I've tried to pin down the length of this canoe a number of times on this podcast. It's somewhere from like 12 to 15 feet, this canoe, and you could relatively comfortably fit three people in it. So it's long enough. And this is before I started bringing my like a kayak up to the lake. I would always use kind of like this canoe that is in like admittedly a pain to get in and out of the water. But I was trolling behind the canoe for the first time, and so normally I would take the canoe out and kind of like cast and retrieve and like see what I could catch. But I wanted to take the canoe kind of like around the point and do a little bit of fishing in an area that I didn't want that I hadn't been to before.
Hmm.
And rather than waste that time without catching any fish, I wanted to put the line in the water, and it didn't take me long. I've got this like wooden paddle that I'm using before I realized it's like, hey, this actually is working right at the perfect speed, and I could definitely see myself catching some fish with this line in off of the back of the canoe. It's how I do a lot of my fishing now, actually, off of the back of the kayak, and being able to kind of like paddle and it's kind of an uneven and more natural movement almost that the
Mhm.
lure ends up undertaking. So I ended up kind of like fishing my way down into this little pocket that I knew that I wanted to fish, and I think I caught like a little sunny while I was down there, but still
Mhm.
was kind of unhappy with the morning. It was like a perfect morning, and I knew I wanted to catch something. And so I was kind of making my way back out to that point to fish that point that I always do. And as I was going right down the middle of the canal. And so I was like paddling. I had my paddle and I was going like pretty quick. I had no intentions really of catching any fish, but I figured I might as well have the line in the water.
Mhm.
Well, lo and behold, the line that I had ends up like, and I hadn't ever caught a fish before while I was like trolling behind a canoe. So I didn't know what it was going to do or what it was going to look like. Well, it turns out as I was paddling with my paddle, that line ended up going like straight up and down, and then ended up breaking back kind of like over my shoulder. And I was like, I'm in the middle, and I'm smack dab in the middle of this canal here. There's no way that this is anything besides a fish. So of course I got excited, and as I went to go and grab this pole that's now kind of like flopping around and almost like going over my shoulder, I accidentally nudged my paddle out of the canoe.
Oh, no.
And so now at this point, I'm in a canoe in the middle of this canal without any paddle, but I don't want to give up on this fish. And so I start reeling this fish in, but it's over my shoulder. And so as I do, for those that are familiar with fishing poles, you know that there's like a brake that allows for you to compact them. Well, the torque that it underwent as it went over my shoulder ended up actually separating the two parts of the pole. So there I am with with my reel trying to reel in a fish on a now like broken pole that is like in two separate pieces while my paddle is floating in the middle of this canal, and I'm thinking to myself, all I got to do is just catch this fish and it's all going to be worth it. So I end up kind of like reeling this thing in, and as it turns out, it initially had gotten itself hooked on the lip, but
Mhm.
then with all of this torque and everything that had gone around, I ended up reeling this fish in sideways. It was hooked under its gill sideways. I ended up reeling this thing in, but I ended up boating the fish. And then as I did, I was like, well, like it looks like trolling behind the canoe actually is worthwhile. Like I was able to catch a fish here. Now, how about that paddle? And as I looked with the reeling in and with the drifting that I had done, it was a good 75 yards away. Like I had drifted down this canal, and there was enough of a current to kind of like push the canoe along. And so I didn't have anything that was in there besides my tackle box, which is like with just like rectangular. It's got like my lures and everything in it. It's got like
Mhm.
a couple of bags of some false worms and everything. So there I am, pinching it between my fingers alongside this 16-foot canoe, and I'm trying to paddle with my like tackle box, which is like roughly the size of, I don't know, it's no more than like 12 or 13 inches long. I'm trying to like pinch it next to me, like alongside this canoe, as like in order to make my way back to my wooden paddle, which fortunately was floating. So I was able to make it back there. But it was a good 75 yards like against the current that I needed to work in order to be able to make my way back. So it was between the poles, between the pole breaking and then not having my paddle. It was definitely an issue with some of the equipment that it is that I had there. But a lot of times when it comes to kind of like equipment issues, I find that I I'm not catching fish because of like a deficiency in certain equipments that I have. So,
Yeah.
like for instance, like barrel swivels, which you kind of like put on your line in order to, especially when you're using a lot of lures, kind of like I am. The barrel swivels allow for that lure if you're like just to tie it right onto kind of like that like keychain loop, if you will. It's never it's not going to move naturally like a fish would in the water. So like these barrel swivels, it's one of those things that I always end up running out of before I run out of anything else. Just from lines getting caught in the like caught in trees and stuff like that, you end up cutting them, and you don't end up getting back your lures, but you replace your lures, and you've got lots of other different lures. But those barrel swivels end up being something that ends up like adjusting the movement of the lure in a way that I don't like if you don't have those barrel swivels. So
Mhm.
not having enough of those is kind of like an equipment issue. Similarly, like clamps, like the little like swivel clamps that you can use in order to like very quickly be able to change out like one lure for another. Let's say that you want to be able to get a like a lure that is that's going to allow for you to get at the right depth, or that you want to be able to kind of like change out to be able to get something kind of like a whopper plopper, something that's going to be kind of like on the surface. Well, if you are fishing with a line that's going right to your lure because you ran out of these clamps, well, then you're kind of stuck with whatever the lures are that are on your lines until you get it either caught in a tree, or you decide to kind of like cut it off because you're so desperate to get a different lure on there. So like not having enough of those clamps, I've had issues with, and then lures particularly too, like wanting a particular lure. I've talked about the shad rapala that I really like, but not just those ones. There are some that like you can cast really far. There are some that are at like the exact depth that it is that you want to hit, if you're seeing some fish, and it can be kind of frustrating if you've got an equipment deficit, and so you don't have like the lure that you want, or like the swivels and stuff that you want.
Now,
One thing that
before we
yeah.
go move on from that too much, as far as the swivels and clamps and stuff like that, now, do you usually, how much line do you leave between like the clamp or the clasp and then like the lure itself, or are you putting it right onto the lure?
That's a good question. And I have it pretty close to the I'll go barrel swivel pretty close to the clamp, and then I'll put my lure loop right onto the clamp.
Okay.
Now that's different if I'm doing down lines. So if I've got like a down line that's got like a weight on it, I'll have that weight probably. Uh, I don't know if you can't see this at home, but I'm kind of like trying to like judge how far, maybe like 3.5 feet or so. Like I'll leave like some line between where my weight is going to be and where kind of like the hook and the fish is going to be if I'm using a down line.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just to give the fish the freedom to be able to kind of like move around without being kind of like right there on the with like the weight right there.
Nice.
But for the most part, when I'm doing as much, I go back and forth between casting and retrieving and trolling a lot. And while you could make the argument that leaving too much line there could end up affecting your cast, because now you're kind of spacing out the things that have weight that are
Mm-hmm.
at the end of your cast, and now the way that they land in the water might be kind of like topsy turvy if you have too much space in between them. But for me, that ends up really affecting if you've got kind of like a couple of points of contact on your line. It's going to end up affecting the way that the fish. The way that the lure looks when you're trolling behind your kayak or behind your canoe or
Mm-hmm.
behind the boat, and that's something that I can't afford to do. And so for that reason, I have it pretty. It goes like barrel swivel right into that clamp, and then I'll put the loop for the lure right onto that clamp, which also makes it very nice for changing out those lures right on the clamp, because I'll just kind of like undo the clamp, and then you just put that new lure right on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of for the most part the way that I'll go about doing it.
All right, and then I got one more question on this one. So,
Yep.
you don't, so you're not seeing a lot of with those attaching it right to lure. You're not seeing a lot of impact on the lure movement with that.
So you're saying like putting
The
the
clamp right on the lure. Does it affect
No,
how it
no, no, I
moves
do see
really?
so if I've got a barrel swivel that goes right into a clamp, and then that clamp goes right onto the lure, I do see a lot of really good natural movement there,
Okay.
because the barrel swivel will allow enough movement in that clamp, it essentially means that the clamp can kind of spin freely, and then the lure, it has the freedom to be able to kind of like move along that
Mm-hmm.
clamp as well. And so it kind of comes down to that barrel swivel allowing for it to be able to have whatever the free range of motion it is. When I'm having issues is when I have an equipment deficit, right? So when I don't have that barrel swivel, or when I don't have those clamps, and now what I'm doing is I'm taking that line and I'm tying it right onto the loop for the lure,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have a clamp or I don't have a barrel swivel. And that's when I'm seeing limitations, because now I'm tying it right onto, like I'm essentially tying it right onto the lure.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's gonna more drastically limit the free range of motion. I don't have a barrel swivel anymore. I don't have a clamp, and so tying it right onto that loop is where I see some issues with the way that that lure looks. A
Yeah,
lot of times,
definitely.
in order to get it tight enough, you've got to really tie that thing down
Mhm.
onto that loop. And so when you do, you'll see that as that lure is kind of moving, it's going to end up hitting where it is that you've tied, and it makes it look unnatural in terms
Yeah.
of its movement. So,
And you can
so
also, if you're going right on with no swivel to the lure, depending on what lure you're using, you can run into some line twist issues too.
yes, and thank you for that kind of segue into issues with line, which is something that I've seen a lot too. And this goes beyond just kind of like having tangles and getting like a rat's nest or something like that in your in your line, which is there's nothing more frustrating than that when you're seeing fish jumping at like 15 yards and you're only able to cast 10 because your line's getting like caught up in this net that you've got that's in your reel. So that's very frustrating. But the tension on the line and the like snappability of lines, because fish can snap lines, and oftentimes it'll end up coming at I'm always, whenever it is that I end up losing a fish like at the point of the line or something like that, I'm always worried that A, it's my tie, like the way that it is
Mhm.
that I have it tied on, or that the line like tension is not quite right. And I've been convinced that I've I know that I've lost some fish, and this story is going to kind of get into that because my tension on my line was too tough. And before earlier on in my kind of like fishing days, I thought that like you want that line really really taut, and you don't want a lot of drag on that line, because if you have a lot of drag on your line, you're going to end up you're in a better position to be able to not lose fish, because they're not going to put, well, that's not exactly how it works. You actually do want a little bit of give on that line, so that if a fish were to hit your lure and you're to be reeling it in, you've got very little wiggle room. You've got essentially you if you've got a very taut line and you don't have any give on your drag, you don't have any of that wiggle room. And so what I found is that a lot of times I'd have a fish that I bring all the way up to the end of its reel, and then it would kind of like hit the top of the pole, and then I would end up like losing the fish because there wasn't enough give at that moment when it ends up making its way to the top of the pole. And
Mhm.
so I had a moment with a largemouth bass, and I fish a lot more spotted bass, which are so much fun to fish. But every now and then in Lake Kiowee, which is where our family has a lake house, there's a couple of largemouth bass, and largemouth bass are for the most part a lot more territorial, and so they'll hang around docks, they'll hang around kind of like the same kind of like rocks. They're a lot more territorial than spotted bass are. And so I was by this dock, is probably 3 or 4 down on my kind of like normal loop that I'm doing, but it was some evening fishing, and for some reason I've caught a lot more largemouth bass evening fishing than I have like morning fishing. I don't know
Hmm.
why that is, but I was making my way kind of like in and out of these different docks that were there, and I was making my way back. I hadn't caught any fish on this particular morning. I was still in the canoe, so this must have been, it was before kayak, so it would have been like 4 or 5 years ago, and I felt this line hit, and it went really hard. And
Hmm.
so there I am, I'm like reeling this thing in, but I had my drag set too tight. And so I'm reeling this thing in, reeling this thing in, reeling this thing in. I see it at one point pop out of the water, and I'm like, ooh, this is a big fish. And it was a lot darker green than it is that I'd like of in terms of its color than a lot of
Hmm.
fish that it is that I'd been catching. And that's because it was a largemouth bass instead of a spotted bass. I didn't know this at the time. But I keep reeling it in, and so like I brought it all the way up to the canoe, and I can see this thing. And a lot of times, for those that are frequent fishers, you might have experienced this too. Like when the fish ends up, when they're on the line and they've got their hook in their mouth and they see the boat, a lot of times when you get them close to the boat, they shoot straight down because they get skittish when they see the boat. And so that exact same thing happened to me. I got close to the boat and then bang, it went right down. So there I am trying to like reel this thing in. And again, my drag was set too tight. And so I ended up bringing this thing all the way up, and it was a monster of a fish. I mean, this thing was like in for Lake Kiwi, this is humongous. It was probably like 16 or 17 inches. And so this
Wow.
is like a big, and it was fat, Pat. This thing was like it had a like a gut on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm reeling this thing in, and it comes all the way up to the top of the line. And I noticed that it was a largemouth bass, and this thing was like dark hunter green. And so there I am. I'm trying to like swing it over, and when I did, the the tail of the fish ended up hitting the side of the canoe
Mm-hmm.
as I was trying to like get it into the boat so that I could get the hook out of its mouth. And as it did, that tail hitting the line when it had that much tension on it ended up breaking the line right at the point above the lure. And so I watched it. It was like it happened in slow motion. This green lure that I had that was my father-in-law's was sticking out of this fish's mouth. It hit its tail on the side of the canoe. The line snapped, and this thing went boom. It hit the side of the canoe and it popped back up. And Pat, I swear, I say this to my nieces and nephews when I tell this story. This fish, it looked me in the eye and it winked at me with this green lure hanging out of its mouth, and then it hit the side of the canoe and it fell right into the water. And so I lost not only the fish, I wasn't able to get a picture of it or anything like that, but I lost that lure that's sticking out of its mouth too. And I tell my nieces and nephews about this story, and I call them Big Mean Green, the largemouth bass. That I'm determined to catch this fish, and when I do, it's going to still have that green
Oh
lure sticking
man.
right out of its mouth. Of course, this is like the tall tales that end up coming about. But kind of like that's kind of as much of, and this is kind of a transition into the next section, but it's as much of kind of like a fault of mine as it is anything else. Like not being able to like that was an issue with the tension that I had on the
Mm-hmm.
line that I've since been a lot more lenient on that drag, and I've realized that the drag isn't just about like snappability, and in fact, it's kind of counterintuitive sometimes. You want there to be a little bit of drag, and you want to give this fish a little bit so that they aren't so like irky jerky, and that it's not quite as like tight at the point of contact when it is that they got their lure in their mouth. But I guess one last thing in terms of kind of like equipment stuff, that I've lost a lot of time over the years with kind of like getting my equipment onto or into my car, particularly with like kayaks. And before I ended up getting some like kayak straps that I can ratchet down, and before I knew the importance of making sure that I had that all done the night before, I was using rope. And so, in true Boondock Saints slash Carol fashion, I know Pat is laughing here because we always have rope in the back of our car. And for
Yep.
those of you that are familiar with Boondock Saints, there's a whole scene in there about the importance of rope. And so the I was using rope in order to try and like tie down my kayak, and I probably one morning that I was trying to get out on the water, I probably wasted like 15 minutes or so trying to get my kayak up and get everything tied down. And then I backed out of my driveway and I felt the thing shift when I got down to the bottom of the driveway. And we live on kind of like a hill. And so I had to get out of the car, and there I am in front of my neighbor's house. He's out walking the dog, and he's like, "Oh, like you're like got some rope there, getting your kayak down, huh?" And there I am trying to like get everything tied down so I can get out of the water. And there I am for another 15 minutes, ended up losing like 30 minutes of like precious time to
Mm-hmm.
try and get out on the water. And so I saw the importance of and the beauty of like kayak straps, or kind of like those ratchet straps. And I got myself a set of those like that very same day, because I was like, I'm not missing out on this time. And since I've done that, it's been a lot more. I've wasted a lot less time there. But
Yeah, no,
that's,
totally, agree. Anything that can save you a little bit of time, especially in prep, is like
yeah,
so totally worth it because it allows you to get a little bit more time out in the woods or, fishing or whatever. Those time savings are huge, I feel like.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, moving off of the equipment error and moving into mental errors now. I mean, I haven't made too many mental errors. I mean, so far, I mean, obviously, I think there's a lot of mental errors that happen on the reg, right? But that's just part of hunting and fishing, just, messing up your spot, messing up the way you're walking in. But I do have a couple short, anecdotes about mental errors, mostly around just deer blowing at me. Obviously when you're hunting, and if a deer picks up you, like sees you or smells you, what they'll do is they'll blow, and kind of signaling to other deer that something's kind of just not right in the area. And I've had this happen a handful of times to me, but the ones that are particularly painful are when they're kind of like your fault, right? So I remember, at least on one occasion, it's been sitting in the tree stand for a long time. It's cold. The light's down. It's already, sun's down. It's pretty much going to be last shooting light, but probably 5 to 10 minutes until like end of shooting light. But I decide, I'm cold. I've been sitting here all day. I haven't seen anything. I'm going to pack up a little bit early. So I pack up my gear, get myself down to the bottom of the tree. And as I'm, pulling my backpack on and like hoisting it up onto my shoulders, I hear a deer blow. And I say, oh man, if I had just stayed in the tree, wait until the end of shooting light to get my gear down, instead of saving that 5 minutes, I might have had a chance at that deer, which is
Yeah.
obviously a little bit frustrating. And then, I had this happen a handful of other times too, but, with deer blowing that I can't see, right? First time I was, actually hunting off the ground. I had a decent area where I looked like it was going to be a good spot. I got, hunched in next to a tree, and then, all of a sudden, light comes, the sun starts to come up, and I hear a deer blowing at me. So obviously indicating that the spot that I thought was pretty good, maybe not quite as good as I had originally thought. But Mike, as far as mental errors, what do you have any good stories around that?
Listen, Pat, I've got so many stories. I've got so many stories about my failures, and like, like across the board. I mean, that they really are endless. I can't remember if I told this story on the podcast yet or not, but the I've got this really awesome plateau that I really like fishing on up on Lake Lanier, and it's it's within like 75 to 100 yards of like the put in that I really like. It's a really close spot. It's close to a lunch spot that I like to go to.
Ooh.
So like it's this pretty drastic plateau, and I mean it's got to come up to like 3.5 feet or so. I mean it's a
Mm-hmm.
really shallow little spot here, and it's probably, I would guess, maybe 20 yards long or so. So it's this decent patch that kind of like comes up. It's a plateau from kind of like the larger, deeper portion of the lake that goes down at least like 30 feet. And it's pretty drastic as in terms of its steepness coming up. So there's this little like kind of like feeding frenzy that ends up happening like right at
Mm-hmm.
the top of that plateau. But a lot of fishermen know about it. So they'll be kind of like perching themselves out there. Well, one day, and I'll keep this story short because something tells me that I've told this story before, but I got out there, and from my car, I could see that there was a boat that was kind of like making their way along the far edge and kind of making their way over to this plateau that I really wanted. And so, in terms of a mental mistake, I was like really rushing to get myself with the kayak blown up as fast as I could. It was still when I was using like an inflatable kayak,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could get out into that spot as quickly as I could. I didn't want to be fishing anywhere else. I wanted to be out on that plateau as quick as I could. And so I put the kayak in and I get myself into the water. I got my lines ready to go and I start paddling out, and my kayak is going all over the place. I'm being blown every which way. And I couldn't understand what it's going on. Like I'm trying to paddle and my kayak is like doing like 360s in the water. I'm like, what's going on? It wasn't until I realized that I was about halfway out to the point, kind of like, or halfway out to that plateau, struggling to get myself out there, that I realized that I had left the kayak fin in my rush
Oh
that's
no.
supposed to go on the bottom of the kayak in order to steer me and keep me from going all over the place. I'd left it in the backseat of the car in my rush to get out on the water. And so I ended up kind of like finagling and getting my way there. But there was no use in being out there because I couldn't end up catching anything because I was being blown all over the place. So
Yeah.
I ended up like um, conceding the spot to this fisherman who was indeed trying to make his way over there. But as I was kind of like drifting out again, no fin on the back of my kayak, but I trolled back to the beach where I had put in, and I ended up catching a small. It wasn't anything bigger than maybe like 6 or 7 inches. It was a
Mhm.
small spotted bass, but I caught something even without my fin in there. And I don't think that I would have necessarily caught that fish had it not been for the fact that I had forgotten that fin. So
Yeah, there
it's
you
kind of
go.
a bit of a blessing in disguise. But the biggest thing that I see with like my mental mistakes is thinking that I can kind of like lace in there like a perfect cast, or get my line like right where it is that I want for it to go, and I end up hitting trees,
Mhm.
oftentimes with my casting. And because like I'm casting and retrieving so often um, around kind of like the edges of water and up by Lake Kiwi. It's this beautiful lake, but there's a lot of overhanging trees, and I anticipate this being the case if and when I finally get down onto the Chattahoochee River too, because there's so much overhang in that kind of like impedes your ability to be able to cast. And so I'll try and like cast and really get my line out there and kind of like underestimate my strength in some instances
Mhm.
and end up with my line in the tree. And it's always so frustrating because it's like, gosh, now I end up spending like 5 or 10 minutes trying to get this line down,
Mhm.
and I don't want to lose a lure either. I want to like I like these lures for a reason, and so like I end up losing 5 10 minutes, and nothing's worse than seeing fish like jumping all over your area while you're trying to while your line's up in a tree and not in the water, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a mental error. But the big one for me, and this isn't fishing related, but it is kayak related. What my first year down here in Georgia, I was living in it was living in a house with a bunch of bartenders and stuff, teaching America's youth, and living with a whole bunch of bartenders that were kind of like serving at bars in the area. And I had a really close friend of mine, still a very close friend of mine, Stephen Vickery, who is if you're listening, Stephen, you definitely remember this story. But it was one of my first times ever going on the Chattahoochee, and we went pretty far up. We went up to Dahlonega, which is probably an hour and a half or so north of kind of like our area. And at the time, it was down in kind of like Brookhaven, living in that house.
That would be like an hour and a half drive, is that?
Yeah, yeah, like an hour and a half drive. And the way that we were kind of like working it is we only brought up one. We That's what it was. We brought up one car, but we brought a bike. And
Mm.
so what we did was we like took the canoe and kayak and left it kind of like at one point up in the river. And Ian, who's another one of our friends, who was he actually ended up he went, I think he went to Appalachian State, and he ended up going out and living in Colorado actually, and being a river guide out in
Oh,
Colorado. So
fun.
in terms of like outdoors, like outdoor stuff, like he's like super legit.
Nice.
And he and Steven were very close friends. And they always like were going out on the river, and Steven like invited me, and I wanted to go. And so we got out on the Chattahoochee River. They were in a canoe together, and they had another kayak. It was like a short kayak. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm talking like 6 feet. I mean,
Wow. It's
this
real
thing is
short.
like really small. This was kind of like my introduction into kayaking, and we got a it was called the Splitting Hairs Variety Pack by Red Hair Brewery. And Pat, actually, when you came down for my bachelor party, you actually
Mhm.
got the exact same Splitting Hairs
Oh,
Variety
that
Pack.
was a good one. I like that
Oh,
one.
it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And I recently was at the grocery store, and I was trying to find it because I knew it was going to be a story that I wanted to bring up on this podcast. And they've either discontinued it, or it
Mhm.
wasn't at the grocery store like it used to be. It used to be like very accessible. But they have a Watership Brown. It's kind of like their like brown air, and
Mhm.
brown ale, and it is fantastic. It's also 7.5%. And so we like took this out on like in Dahlonega. We like planted the canoe with the like at one point in the river, and then like drove the car up there, planted the canoe, and then Stephen Vickery, kind of like rode his bike back up to where we had been planted with the the canoes and the kayaks and everything, so that we'd be able to bring the vessels, the canoe and the kayak down, be able to put it right back up on the car, and then we
Hmm.
just run and grab the bike. So it's kind of like this
Nice.
orchestrated kind of like,
Yeah.
you got to do this before you do that type of thing.
Hmm.
Well, anyways, we ended up getting on the water, and we were out for like 3.5 hours or so. We took like the better part of the afternoon, and
Nice.
this was my first time ever being like in a kayak on the Chattahoochee. I was having so much fun, just like chatting up with my friends and having definitely a few too many of of these watership browns, and it wasn't until like afterwards when we kind of like made our way down towards our landing point that we were trying to reach. And I said that we were out there for 3.5 hours or so. It was way longer than that. We were out there like pretty much all day.
Yeah.
And so we're getting in there, and it's like it's dark out and it's nighttime, and so we're taking our vessels out of the water, and I did the kayak first, and there was definitely a moment where I was just like, oh yeah, like I can definitely feel those watership browns a little bit here. And I walked back through the woods to get to kind of like where it is that we were pulling the canoe out.
Mm.
And so I was in my prime at the time. I was like 23 years old, and so like I'm on the front of this canoe and we're lifting it up, and as I'm backing out of the woods, I rolled my ankle
Oh
and
no.
ended up dropping the canoe on my rolled ankle as I'm like making
Oh
my way
no.
out of the. And I had never like known what the phrase like blown up like a basketball had really meant until I saw my ankle. We ended up going and like getting some food and stuff at a bar in Dahlonega. We got some like chicken wings that were there.
Hmm.
I've since gone back to Dahlonega. I don't know if this bar is still there anymore. It's one of those things where I can't find it if it is. But we had some like chicken wings that are there. Uh, uh, Vic was still there. I think Ian fell asleep at the table while we're waiting for these chicken wings to come. And I'm sitting there with my ankle like propped up on a bar stool, and I'm like, Vic, Stephen is what I call Stephen Vickery. It's like, Vic, does this look right to you? And he's looking down at it, and he was like, Mike, that thing is so swollen. And so that next the this was it must have been in like February, and it was decently cold. But I remember because then the very next day was the Super Bowl,
Mm.
and back in 2014, it was a terrible game. It was between the Seahawks and the Broncos, and the
Okay.
Seahawks ended up like blowing them out, like 43-8 or something like that. It was not a game, but I watched the entire thing, and of course I've got like all these bartenders that are my roommates that are trying to get me to go up to these different like bars and grills and stuff to
Mm.
be watching the game with them. And there I am in bed with my foot propped up on a pillow with frozen peas on my ankle because I rolled my ankle so bad, to the point that when I went back to school, I ended up going to the athletic trainer and getting myself some crutches. It's the only time in my life that I've ever actually had crutches, and it's because of my rolled ankle out on the Chattahoochee River. So
Wow.
that's my canoeing and kayaking story.
Nice. Well, that is certainly exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it, yeah, definitely falls within the mental errors
Yes.
in that one as well. But moving on to things outside of your control, I got a handful of stories on this front, and a lot of them come back to kind of just starting out as a bow hunter around here. So it took me a while to finally get some success as far as hunting goes. A couple years to consistently be on the deer, and then once I got a few years under my belt, and we're seeing more deer consistently. Just making connection with one ended up being a bit of a challenge for me. So this was a few years ago. I remember it was really my first good deer experience. I, got set up in the morning. I decided that I was going to utilize two different spots. This was the first year I was doing two different spots. Usually I like to do one, like a morning sit and an afternoon sit, because, as the way I think of it is a deer is gonna be in one place in the morning and then probably a different place in the afternoon based on what they're trying to do, whether they're going to be looking for food or looking for bedding, that sort of thing. So this is the first time I was, kind of utilizing that tactic. And I went to my morning spot and I, set up, got set up my tree stand. My plan was I was going to set up the tree stand in the morning, then sit until probably around 11 o'clock, and then basically take that tree stand down, walk to the other spot, set it up over there, right? So a lot of work, a lot of climbing up trees, setting up tree stands. So I go to my morning spot. First off, I have trouble finding the tree that I want to set up in.
Of
I'm looking
course.
around in the dark, trying to figure it out. And at some point, I just say, fine, this tree that I'm standing in front of is going to be it because I'm not walking around anymore. I get set up. There's like a big old bush on the bottom, so even getting the first sticks on there was a challenge. I eventually make it up. I'm sitting up there. I don't see anything. It was a blown morning. Nothing going on there at all. So I said, all right, well, take it back down. We'll get set up for the afternoon. I take my sticks down. I take my tree stand down. I walk over to this other spot. Now this is like the middle of the day, right? It's early season. Generally speaking, not a time where you're gonna expect to see a lot of deer. So I find a new spot. I get my tree stand set up. I climb up, and I got my bow up there, but I haven't even sat down yet, and I see a deer walk like slowly creeping by. And I'm like, oh, that's a deer. That's exciting. This is like the first time I've really ever had a deer like in a favorable position, like not seeing me, like good lighting, looking like I'm gonna get an opportunity here. So I'm like, this is it. This is gonna happen. And then I see that it's a buck. And as soon as I see those antlers, and they talk about like buck fever and getting like kind of crazy when that happens, literally my knees start shaking. Like so I'm up in this tree waiting for this deer, and it's not even a big deer. I mean, it's like probably a 2-year old. It has a rack, but it's not like a big rack, right? He's walking through, and I say, all right, I'm gonna, as soon as he gets close enough where I think I can make the shot, I'm gonna draw. So I draw back, and then he stops, and I'm like at full draw, holding back. Now my bow at this stage is not a new bow, so you're not talking like 80-90% let off. We're talking like maybe 50% let off, right? So I'm holding
Okay.
that 30 pounds back while I'm waiting for this deer to come through. And I'm holding, and eventually he, takes a step out, and then I let go and take the shot, and I hear a huge thwack, and I was like, oh well, that might be good. And obviously the deer runs off, and I was like, all right, let's see if I can see anything, see where he went. I'm looking where the deer went. It's like, all right, my heart is pumping. I'm literally, my knees are shaking. I need to
Yeah.
sit down because I'm like hyperventilating in the tree. I'm like, did I
Yeah.
do it? Did I get a deer? So I eventually I'm pulling up my binoculars to try and see if I can see where the deer went, and all of a sudden I'm looking through the binoculars, and I see a deer head pop out, and like right out of the side of my vision. I'm like, what? Is there another deer over here? And I see him walking slowly back to the same area that I just took a shot at the deer. I'm like, it's another deer. And then I look again. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the same deer. It's the same deer I just took a shot at. I'm like, well, clearly this deer is doing just fine. So, and he like creeps his way back over. Is like, well, I mean, I might as well take another shot at him.
Yeah.
So, at this time, he's a little bit further away, a little bit more brush in the way. So I, take a pull back and send another arrow. And once again, the deer runs off. And I was like, all right, well, maybe I got him this time. So I'm looking again with my binoculars. I'm looking again and trying to see if I can see him. And again, the deer pops up in my binoculars. Like, what is going on? I missed this deer twice, and the deer kept coming back. But the reason he was coming back is because there was a ton of acorns on the ground. So this is like where he wanted to be
Yeah.
as far as food was concerned.
And he didn't
Uh,
care that there
he
were arrows that were flying if it looked like
clearly
he could
he
hit the
didn't
acorns.
care that there were arrows that were flying at him. But eventually, I took the 2 shots. He eventually runs off. I get down and start looking for my arrow, and I can't find it anywhere. I can't see a single thing. I'm looking for blood. Is there any traces of blood in that area for either of the arrows? Nothing. So I call in reinforcements. I call in Dad, see if he can help me out finding any sort of trace of either my arrow, which you would expect to see, or blood or anything to indicate that I might have hit the steer. So he comes in, he's looking around. We scour the area for probably close to 2 hours. Now, this is like in October. It wasn't super cold, probably like 70 degrees in October, a relatively warm day. So we're like dripping sweat trying to figure out, what happened here. Eventually we decide, you know what? We got like the reason we were looking so hard is like the only reason that the arrow would be gone would be like if the deer got hit and he took it with him, right? I mean,
Right.
that's like a relatively common thing that would happen, but we didn't see blood, we didn't see anything, so we were very, very confused about what was going on. We eventually decided to, pack it up, call it a day, and kind of go from there. Trying to determine, like, was my bow on? Was my sights off? Did something get messed up? Kind of where are we in that situation? So we take a break. Shoot my bow. It looks fine. There's no issues with that. I come back to hunt like probably I'm gonna say a week or two after that, and this is actually after I had just dropped my tree stand out of the tree, so I couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't hunt in the tree. But I sit down under a rock, and I'm just like looking around. It was in very vaguely the same area, and I just happened to look up at the right angle, and there is my arrow sticking out of the side of the tree that was like probably 10 yards in front of where my tree stand was previously.
Of
So
course.
clearly what happened was either from holding the bow back for so long, or if my bow hit a branch while it was actually firing, misdirected the arrow, and it ended up going into a tree instead of over to the deer that was
Yep.
munching on
Mhm.
acorns
Yep.
a mere 20 yards away. So
Yep.
that was miss number one of that year. Now fast forward a little bit into later into the season, we move into like the Thanksgiving time frame. So my wife's parents were going to be coming over. We were going to be having like a Thanksgiving dinner on Thanksgiving. But day before Thanksgiving, like any hunter, I snuck out of work a little bit early to try and get a little bit of time in the woods before the holidays. So I get out of work. I manage to make my way into the trees right around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which in October isn't too bad. Gives me like an hour and a half or so to hunt, and giving me that an extra opportunity. And I happen to, it's getting close to dark. I'm texting my wife saying, not seeing too much, and then all of a sudden I see a deer coming down, and he's walking right on the path that I'm expecting him to see. And I said, "Oh, this is gonna be it," and it's another buck, similar sized rack. Now, I mean, granted, it could have been the same one. I'm not can't say for sure. I think it looked a little bit different, maybe a little bit bigger, but another opportunity at another deer. So it was starting to get really exciting. Now this time I knew not to draw my bow back too early.
Yep.
Wait until we're in a proper position, make sure the deer is in a good angle, and then take the shot from there, which is what I did. But this time, I shot and I watched him. Now this is getting closer to last light, so not as easy to see as it was the last time. So I shoot, and the deer runs probably like 10 yards and it stops. I'm like, all right, well, what are you doing? He's kind of behind a tree, not a super good area, but trying to figure out, I think, what was going on. So I take another shot and see if I can hit him. Not obviously not a good high probability shot, but I figured if I managed to get him on the first one, maybe if I get another shot on him, there's a better opportunity for me recovering that deer.
Right.
So I took another shot. Nothing happened, and the deer literally stood there for 15 to 20 minutes after the sun went down. So then I'm no longer in shooting light, and I'm just waiting for this deer to just walk away. So I got down, I took a look at my arrow. There's nothing on it. It was a total clean miss. Looking at the
Yeah.
area afterwards, I realized there was a stick that was like just not a very tiny stick, probably about a quarter-inch thick, right? That was like right in the area where I was shooting, and I couldn't see it because it was last light. So what ended up happening was I took my shot. That arrow deflected off the stick, totally missed him, and that deer lives to fight another day.
Of
So
course.
yep, It's that's these are the things that keep you coming back though, because those were two big great opportunities for me after not having a lot of success, and that's really what kept me going, and that's what moved me into my next season where I did actually start seeing some success. Now that success didn't come with with its own amounts of failure there as well. I I was going to utilize a similar strategy to what I did for the previous ones where I had seen those deer and missed on those opportunities, which was utilizing a spot for the morning and then a different spot for the afternoon, just based on the fact that the deer, generally speaking, are going to be doing different things in those different time frames. So. Uh, in this instance, what ended up happening is in the morning, I set up my stand. It was gonna be working pretty well. I thought it was gonna be in a good area. So I climbed up the tree, set it up, waited all morning, and didn't end up seeing anything. It was a lot of hard work getting that stand up, but then ultimately, decided I needed to pull it down because I wasn't seeing deer in that area. So on to the afternoon plan.
About how long do you typically let it go there before you kind of make the call that you're not seeing enough to make it worthwhile? Because I know when it comes to fishing, like I'll end up overfishing a spot because I'm so determined. And obviously, if you're seeing signs like of like jumping fish and stuff like that, you're not going to move on from an area. But are we talking like hours? Are we talking like a full session, like a morning session? How long are you waiting there before you're moving on?
Yeah, generally speaking, the deer population up in New England isn't like there's not a ton of deer. So I'm not seeing tons and tons of deer on a given sit. If I see, a deer, that would be a good morning for me.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, I'm gonna let it play out pretty much the whole morning before I'm gonna move. So usually I'll get in before the sun's up, and then hunt from sunup all the way to probably around lunchtime before I get down and plan on moving to my next stand.
Got it.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's usually how I kind of play that. But in this instance, the morning stand didn't really work out, so plan to move to my afternoon stand. The afternoon stand was kind of like right on the edge of a marsh with a lot of like thick cover right around the edge. So had a good area where I thought the deer were gonna be coming based on the wind. And what was nice about this morning is that there was actually going to be a wind shift. So in the morning, the wind was coming from the north, which is why I was in that morning stand. But in the afternoon, the wind was switching around, so it was going to be actually coming from the southwest, which is really good for deer movement because if the deer are bedded based on wind number one and the wind shifts, those deer are no longer with a wind advantage. So they'll either one be at a disadvantage to the hunter, or two, they're going to get up and try and move to get that wind back in their advantage. So you tend to see a lot of deer on their feet when you see these like wind shifts happening.
Wow, that is fascinating. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so that was the plan, right? Moving into my afternoon. So I walked in nice and quietly, trying not to break any branches. Got up in the tree, set up my stand. Tried to do it as quiet as possible. Got squared away. At this point it's lunchtime, so got squared away with my tree stand lunch, which was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I got cozy waiting for Mr. Deer to show up. So I sat there for
How
a
nervous are you about your, like, food scent and ending up being something that's gonna affect the deer?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go out there eating like a tuna fish sandwich, but for the most part, it's not I mean, I haven't noticed anything as far as impacting the deer. Some people like bring coffee to the stand, which is obviously
Mhm.
relatively fragrant. I think, as it generally, if it's like a normal smelling thing, it's not going to really bother the deer
Yeah,
too
okay,
much. So that's
yeah.
usually at least how I play it. The bigger thing is like noise. So if your food has any sort of packaging
Yeah.
that's like crinkly or anything like that, you want
Yeah.
to kind of
It's
either take it out of the package before you get into the woods, that way minimizing that crinkling, or like, don't bring crinkly snacks in. Like a potato
I've al
chip bag is generally
Yeah,
not going to be
I
a
was
great
just about
thing
to
in the
say,
tree.
yeah, I've always said that, like, Sun Chips have, like, the crinkliest bag of all time, so you don't wanna be out there with, like, a Sun Chip bag with,
Yeah.
when the deer are coming, so
That's
that
it's
that makes
exactly
sense to me.
right. It's exactly right. So I'm sitting up there within the tree eating my lunch. I finish off my lunch. I'm doing a little reading, and I hear something behind me. So I turn around, looking over towards the marshy area, which is a lot of thick cover, and I see some movement, and I say, "Oh, no, that might be a deer over there." So I turn around, stand up, turning around to get a better look. And as I look back, I see that not only is there one deer, but there's another deer behind it. And the deer behind has a good sized rack. So now I'm starting to get excited. I look at these deer and I think to myself, all right, I missed the last two deer that I took a shot at. So we really need to make sure we're calming down here so we can capitalize on this opportunity. So I grab my bow. I'm still looking at the deer, following them in, trying not to move very much, trying to not have them pick me off, and they keep walking and walking, and the path that they're walking goes basically right underneath my tree stand. So I'm waiting for them to get as close as I feel comfortable with, that I can draw and take a comfortable shot, and not blow this opportunity, but
Yeah, I can
not so
imagine.
close, right, that they're going to be able
Yeah,
to pick up my movement.
that's exactly what I was gonna say. I can imagine that if they get too close too, you might not even have, if they're like really directly underneath you, you're not gonna have as advantageous of a shot as if they were to be like profile to you. So I'm assuming that that plays in a role here as well, kind of like the angle of the shot. And if they end up getting too close, you might end up missing your opportunity because they're too close, which feels like a crazy thing to say, because obviously the close proximity would make for a good shot, but I could see, I'm sure, like angles playing a role into that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if the deer is like right under you, you're more or less shooting directly down through the deer, which actually makes the vitals much smaller. Your
Yeah,
best shot is really probably about a 15 to 20 yard shot broadside is going to be your best opportunity
yeah,
at a deer. But these deer they continue to walk in. They're getting closer and closer, and eventually they get to right around 10 yards, and they're right perfect broadside. So I've determined, this is the time. I draw back, wait for him to step into where he needs to be, and I take the shot. And I see the deer jump backwards, stand there, and stare at me. And the arrow went right over his back, missed him entirely. But the deer's still standing there, and the doe is still standing there. We got a doe and a buck, both standing there staring at me, and I just freeze. I'm not doing anything. I don't want to move. I don't want to blink. I'm just hoping that these deer aren't going to take off and they're going to just kind of keep going on their merry way. Um, and I probably wait there for standing perfectly still for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then the deer start stomping. This is something that deer will do to try and get, if they see something that's out of place, they'll, stomp their foot to try and see if it's going to move, see if it's something that they should be scared of. But I keep
yeah,
freezing. I don't do any sort of movement, and eventually the deer start walking along as they were going before. So I take like a little bit of a breath as the deer keep walking, still trying not to move at all. And as they keep kind of going along their way. Now they're still in range. I mean, they were at 10 yards, and really they didn't move when I missed. They're still basically maybe moving away from me at this point, probably at like a little bit of an angle, but more or less like they're still within that like 15-yard bubble. So I'm
And I'm
staying.
sure you still have a shot at this point too if you can get your arrow
Yeah,
notched, right?
exactly. So
Like
I definitely still have a shot because they're not. I mean, obviously they know something was wrong, but they don't. They're not enough for them to be, totally getting out of there. And I think the other thing that was helpful is that, this was in the heat of the rut, so during the breeding season. So this buck was on this doe, and that doe I think was ready to be bred. So there was very little that was going to keep him from being right next to that doe, and the doe kept wanting to go in that direction. So he was sticking with her as well. So now I'm up in the tree. These deer are still here, and I gotta get my arrow back onto the rest in order to take another shot. So I very slowly undo the arrow, attach it to my bowstring, and get myself back in a relatively good shooting position, trying to make sure all my movements are happening when the deer are either looking away or their heads down eating, so they're distracted while I'm trying to move. And eventually, I get myself back and I look back up at the deer, and they're still in range. They're in that like 20 to 25-yard range. All my shooting lanes are on the other side of me because I wasn't expecting them to take this particular route to get past me. But I figure they're still in range, so that's a good thing. They keep walking, nothing too concerning going on there, and I see a little opening that's like it'll probably be a 25-yard shot, and it's probably about the size of a pie plate. And I'm like, all right, that seems like it's a doable shot, but I don't know if he's going to walk through there. And all of a sudden, he takes a turn and starts walking directly through the only real shot opportunity that I have.
yeah.
So at this point, I'm thinking, it's kind of now or never. 25-yard shot, totally doable. Gonna take a look at my pins, make sure I'm using my sights instead of not paying attention to that. I draw back as he enters that thing. I take a deep breath, slowly squeeze the trigger and let it go. And this time I watch the arrow go right into the deer. Perfect, double long broadside shot. I see him kick and then run off right into the swamp. I gave it like a couple minutes, and I hear like some sneezing, some like whoosh, shh, coming from a swamp area, and I was like, oh well, that could be a good sign. Generally if you get both lungs, obviously a deer's gonna have a little bit of trouble breathing at that point.
Right.
So you'll hear him kind of coughing or sneezing sometimes. So I was optimistic about that. And the doe that was with this deer is still just standing like underneath my tree, kind of looking around, being like, "Where'd that guy go?" She just stands there. And at some point, she starts stomping a little bit, and then eventually, she's probably stood there for a solid 10 minutes, and then slowly took another 10 to 15 minutes to walk away, because she was just like, "Where did that guy go?"
Yeah.
Totally just kind of confused about what was happening. But she eventually slowly walks away, and then I'm able to take a breath and be like, wow, I feel like it actually happened this time. I
Yeah.
missed the last 3 times I had an opportunity, and now I finally put one on the mark. So
Yeah.
I was like, wow, that was exciting. And then, the work begins, right? So I probably gave it, 30 to 45 minutes. I felt pretty confident about the shot placement and how the deer reacted afterwards, right? And, the coughing, along with the fact that the deer didn't come back to that doe. And, obviously that doe was, ready to be bred. So if there was an opportunity for him to get back there, I think he was going to get back there. Those two things combined, I felt I was pretty confident that the deer was gonna be dead.
Yeah.
So I called in Dad. I gave him a call. Said, I think I got a big one on the ground. So he came up, helped me track him down. I actually got down from the tree stand, started to look for blood, found some blood, found my arrow. Eventually, followed that blood right up to the deer, and he was dead probably about 40 yards away from where he got shot. So
Okay.
that was pretty exciting. And then the work starts, right? We got some pictures with them, the good old grip and grin.
Yeah.
Got got some good pictures, and then it was down to gutting them out and then dragging them out. So at this point, right, where the deer died was probably right on the edge of the swamp, so it wasn't wet, but it also like wasn't a dry area either, like dry enough for
Mhm.
us to be do our work gutting them out, but not so dry that it was like totally dry. And it was also, I would say, to get to this spot was about a half-mile walk down like a I would say like a four-wheeler path, and then like another quarter mile into like thick woods. So we're talking like three-quarters of a mile out out to get back to the car. And this is a relatively good-sized deer, so it was gonna take us some time to get back. So
Yeah.
we it was starting to get dark. It was probably about 2 o'clock when I shot the deer. So by the time we found him and started getting him out, I mean it was probably 3:30, 4 o'clock, starting to get a little bit dark. So you got the whole flashlights, you got the headlamps. We got them all squared away and started dragging them out. We dragged them the half mile to the four-wheeler road, and then we said, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna go utilize a wheelbarrow to get this
Mhm.
deer all the way out, because the wheelbarrow, you can just toss them in there, roll them right out, and down the road, and it should be relatively quick to make that happen. My dad had the wheelbarrow in the back of his car because he knew that this was a plan that could eventually end up happening, right? So we get to the four-wheeler road, and he says, "All right, so what you're gonna do is you're gonna walk back down to the car, and you're gonna go grab the wheelbarrow, and then walk it back to me. We'll load up the deer, and we'll make him back to the road. We'll get back to the car. It'll be no problem at all." I was like, "Oh, great! That sounds like perfect. This is an easy plan. Rolling with a wheelbarrow is not really that big of a deal. Make that happen. It's a half mile back to the car, half mile back. Yeah, it'll be a pain, but it should be pretty quick and certainly easier than dragging a deer." I was like, "Yeah, no problem. I can make that happen." So I start walking away, and Dad yells back to me. He says, "Hey, don't forget the air pump." I say, "The air pump? What do I need an air pump for?" He's like, "Yeah, the wheelbarrow wheel's been giving me some problems recently, but I got an air pump. It's fine. We'll just blow up that tire before we start going. It should be no problem." I was like, "All right, well, I guess I'll grab the air pump and we'll make it back here." So I
How perfectly dad of this story to
right.
have the wheel of the wheelbarrow not be functional.
Yep. So I get back to the car. I grab the wheelbarrow. I grab the air pump, which it's an yeah, sure, it's a like a bicycle pump, right? But this particular bicycle pump, like the nozzle piece that actually attaches to the wheel, is like duct taped together, so it's like hardly held together at all. So I'm
Of
like, all right,
course it
well, I
is.
guess this is the pump we got, so this is what we're gonna use.
Yeah.
So I throw that in the wheelbarrow and I wheel that thing back up to the deer. The deer, I takes me probably 20 minutes to wheel it back. It's not too bad. I get there and I'm like, all right, so let's load this thing up. So we load up the deer, we get him in there. Obviously, it's not super easy, but made it happen. We blow up the tire, get it kind of like it's holding air, and then we start walking along, and we walk probably about, I would say, 20 yards, and the tire is totally flat again. I was like, "Oh no, this is a problem." So what ended up happening is that the tire was so flat and like had such a big hole in it that it wouldn't hold air for more than like 20 yards. And then every 20 yards, we'd either need to fill up the air in that tire, or in some instances, get the tire back on the rim, which was like if the tire falls
Oh
off the rim, right, you gotta like kind of
my
like strap it
gosh.
back on there. So this is a half-mile walk on a four-wheeler path in a wheelbarrow, where we had to so this is what this looked like at 8 o'clock, 8:30, at night. 8 o'clock, probably, let's say 8 o'clock. It's me and my dad, and what we would do is pump up that tire as fast as we could, pump it up as hard as we could, and as soon as we pulled that pump, we would literally start running with this deer in the wheelbarrow on this road with our flat headlamps on for like a solid 50 yards, and then stop, and then do exactly the same thing
Oh
until we got
my
that
gosh.
until we took that whole half mile all the way back to the car. It took us 3 hours
Oh
to
my
get
god.
3 hours to get from that half mile back to the car. We started at I think 5 at the road, and it took us until
Oh
8 p.m.
my
to get back to the car.
goodness
So
gracious.
that is so I guess the in this instance the learnings from this one is make sure when you're shooting at the deer you're using your pins even if it's at a 10-yard shot. And the other, make sure you have a functional wheelbarrow because
Yeah.
if you don't it's going to take you 3 hours to get back to the car.
Oh
So,
my goodness gracious. I didn't know that it took you 3
oh
hours
oh
to make
yeah,
your way
no,
back that.
it was a lengthy process.
And, you know, I'm sure you're doing, like, the mental math during that time too of being like, "If I just were to go at this time right now and, like, abandon ship on this plan and get in the car and go somewhere and buy another wheelbarrow, like, would it be
Oh,
faster to get back
100%.
here?"
We
And
100% would have been faster if we had bought another wheelbarrow, but that would have
like,
meant that
where's the closest Ace
yeah,
Hardware? If I'm able
exactly.
to get this thing, like, I could do this much faster if I just jumped into the car and drove to an Ace Hardware and got another wheelbarrow and then loaded this thing up into a functional wheelbarrow. But you don't start doing that mental math until you're at least halfway
Oh
through,
yeah,
and then
no,
at that point you're like,
we started making that doing that mental math at like hour 1.5 to 2,
yeah,
and then at that point we were it was a sunk cost, so
yeah.
we were finishing it out,
Oh
it
my gosh.
but
That is so perfectly dad and such a perfect first kill,
yeah,
first deer. That's awesome.
but
Good. First of all, good for you, but also, and this is something that I've been thinking too, like a little bit of almost like silver lining, like, I'm not sure with those other misses, if it weren't for those other misses that you had had, if you necessarily would have been able to keep your composure to the point of having that first miss and then kind of like being able to keep yourself cool, collected, being able to take that breath, being able to notch that other arrow in order to be able to get that deer. So those other instances, I'm sure you had and it's so frustrating at the time. And I'm sure that like even now in retrospect, it's like, yeah, it would have been nice to get those other deers too. But I do wonder if like you're kind of like learning from some of those failures. I mean, this is a whole episode about like so when things don't go according to plan, right? And I do wonder if to a certain extent you ended up getting the deer that you did because of your ability to kind of like learn from some of those mistakes and stuff that you had done before. And I think that that's kind of like kudos to you for being able to put some of that into effect and being able to kind of like calm yourself down in that crucial moment, which you wouldn't have necessarily had the practice of being able to do were it not for the fact that you had those misses before. So it's always one of those things, and we say it in teaching all the time, where it's like there's no true failures. You can still learn from even like the mistakes that you're making, and I think that that's something that you kind of put into practice there, even if it took you 3 hours with the wheelbarrow in order to get back. That's hysterical.
yeah, no, that I think that's totally true. I mean, I think the deer that I ended up getting was definitely the biggest deer that I had seen for sure. So I think if that deer had walked out without the past experience of missing the others, I definitely would have been in a different headspace. I mean, as it is, I didn't get him officially scored, but I did kind of tape him out myself, and he ends up going about 141, which is Pope and Young for whitetails, and definitely on the larger side for deer in this area. So, pretty proud of that, and happy with ultimately how it turned out, even though it took a handful of misses to get there.
Yeah.
But as we continue to talk about things that are outside of our control, Mike, do you have any good stories talking about things in that regard as well?
Yeah, I definitely do. There's one that for sure comes to mind, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with hunting or fishing, but it does have to do with canoeing and kayaking and being out on the water. And this was from at this point, this story is like 10 years ago, but like a full year after my the rolling of my ankle, my buddy Vic and that same buddy Ian, we were heading up to the river again. We were gonna float on the hooch for a little bit. And there was it was a longer canoe that we were going out in. So the first one I was out in my own little like tiny little kayak, and that was kind of like my introduction into like kayaking and canoeing, and I was hooked right from the jump. But then we were all going out on the same canoe out onto the Chattahoochee River. and we didn't go all the way up to Dahlonega like we did before, which is, I was saying before, is like, it's a little over an hour to get up to
Mhm.
Dahlonega. Probably even a little bit more than that, certainly more than that. At the time I was living down in Virginia Highlands, which is all the way down in the city. So looking at, we probably drove the same distance, but because we were starting from down in the city, it took us like the same amount of time, but we didn't get as
Mhm.
far up the river. And so we ended up kind of like floating our way down towards like the Roswell-y area, and which is kind of like a suburb that's north of, maybe like 45 minutes or so north of like downtown Atlanta.
Yep.
And so I kind of got the text from Vic the night before, or the day before, while we were still at school actually, and he was teaching with me at Marist at the time, wanting to like get the canoe out and head up. Our friend was in town, Ian was in town, and we knew that we wanted to get out on the Chattahoochee. But the thing was that the weather wasn't looking good that day,
Mm.
and so we were trying to kind of like piece together a little bit of a trip, be able to get out on the river, and then it
Hmm.
downpoured like that evening, and we were like, oh, okay, well, it looks like we're not going to be able to really get out tonight. That's fine. And then the next day, we kind of like last minute were like, you know what? Like there's like that big storm the night before, so there's probably not going to be as many people that are going to be like out on the water.
Mhm.
It was overcast, but there wasn't like a storm or anything that was on like the forecast. So we were like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's head up there. Let's make our way up north of Roswell. We'll float our way down to Roswell. We'll
Mhm.
take out like a little bit south of Roswell, and we'll have ourselves like a couple of hours out on the river. It'll be a lot of fun. So we get up there, and it's always good practice to use the bathroom beforehand, whether it's in the woods or in one of like the little porta potties. We were putting in it like this little like almost like state parky type place
Mhm.
where they had like bathrooms and stuff. And so like we got there first. Vic and I got there first. We were living together at the time, so we took the same car, and we got there first, and like we're using the bathroom, and as I'm coming out of the bathroom, Vic had gone down to the river, and he was like, Mike, I don't know if this is such a good idea. The Chattahoochee is raging right now, and it's really going quick. He was like, what are you thinking? And he was like, I know that out of the three of us, you're probably the least experienced. So like, do you feel comfortable with it? And of course, I'm thinking like, like we'll ask Ian. We'll see
Yeah.
what Ian thinks. Ian pulls up in his car, and he is so jacked up to get out on the river. He was like, this thing is cruising. Like, let's go, guys. This is going to be so much fun. So he kind of convinced us. We were like, all right, let's do it. Let's get out there on the river. And so we took, and the water was moving really quick. And so we got out there, and we spent a little bit of time. We were actually picking some lures out of like the trees and everything
Hmm.
for the tackle boxes, with
Mhm.
people that would kind of like get their lures caught in the trees, and then like cut their lines, abandon
Mhm.
them. But if you're willing to go and get them, the Chattahoochee has so much overhang that you can fill your tackle box with some of them. So a little bit of that. And on this evening, I don't think that we weren't doing like any drinking or anything like that. We were just kind of like heading down there, we didn't have any fishing poles even or anything, but
Mhm.
we were just kind of like making our way up and down. When you're going against the current, like you're putting like every ounce of effort that you can into paddling, and you're barely moving, and
Yeah.
so it's like a workout. And so we're getting towards the part that's kind of like the towards the end of our float, and we're like, you know what, let's turn this thing around. Let's make our way downriver in the direction of the current, and let's kind of get ourselves out of here.
Mhm.
So that's exactly what we did. And as we're doing it, I mean, I don't have any experience on like white water, like rafting or anything like that. But this was the fastest moving current that I've ever been in.
Mhm.
And I'd been on the Chattahoochee a couple of times, and we had been in canoes and kayaks and everything. But we were three people in a, like, it was probably like 16 to 18 foot kayak,
Mhm.
but that's three people. That's a lot of weight that's in this kayak. And I remember thinking beforehand, when we were getting into the canoe, and like Ian and Vic like tossed me like the water bag and everything, and I actually kind of like made a joke. I was like, how often do we actually end up needing these water bags, or needing for these water bags to be like tied onto the
Yeah.
canoe? And they were like, "Oh no, we've never capsized before. Like this canoe has never capsized before. There's no way that we're going to be going under." Well, fast forward a couple of hours, and we're making our way down here, and we ended up getting caught in an undertow over kind of like a shallow rock that was there, this like
Mhm.
massive like 7 foot long rock that was kind of like shallow water
Mhm.
in this river. And so we kind of like cleared this rock, and then the canoe ended up kind of like turning, and we
Mhm.
ended up getting caught in the undertow that was created with the water current over this very large rock that was close to the surface.
Mhm.
And so we got stuck perpendicular to the river,
Oh no.
and the canoe was kind of like not going anywhere. And so we're paddling to try and get ourselves out of this undertow, and we're not moving. If anything, we're slowly tipping back in towards that undertow and towards
Mhm.
that rock. And sure enough, like even after we had said like Ian and Vic were like, no, this is never like we've never capsized before. We've never made our way into the water before. Like there's no way it's gonna end up happening tonight. Well, there we are. We end up going into the water.
Oh way.
Uh at this point, it's like late February, so it was unseasonably, it was like decently warm at the time,
Mhm.
but we're talking like 50 degrees or so, 50 like 50s ish, and this water is moving, and
Mhm.
we ended up going into we're in the Chattahoochee, like full clothes, like in the Chattahoochee River, and
Wow.
now and now the canoe is capsized, and so we have to get this canoe back upright again, and that part is like a blur to me because at this point, like I'm trying not to get stuck into this undertow. I'm
Mhm.
trying to like get myself back up on this like into this canoe, but like this there's like this little divot like past this 7 foot rock,
Mhm.
and so I can't even get myself onto this huge rock in order to be able to try and get myself up into the canoe, and so whereas kind of like just where I had fallen out of the canoe, I wasn't able to do it, and that's exactly what Vic and Ian had been able to do. So I
Mhm.
ended up needing to kind of like basically do a pull up and hoist myself up and get myself up, and like if I were to do that now, like I don't know if I have the body strength in order to be able to get myself back up into that canoe.
Yeah.
Now, and and for those that are listening at home, Pat and I are we swam in high school. Pat swam in college. I had a very brief stint on the Boston College swimming and diving team that was extremely short lived. But like we are very experienced swimmers, and so I was keeping kind of like the edge of the water in my mind, and I was
Mhm.
like I can get to the edge if I need to get to the edge, even with this current moving as fast as it is.
Mhm.
But it was terrifying,
Oh, I'm
and of
sure.
course it's getting later at this point too. It's like 6 o'clock, so like sun's starting to go down, and I'm like finally am able to get myself up into this canoe. And so now it's kind of like this, we're kind of like catching our breath and trying to figure out what it is that we're going to do, because now we're all wet, we're
Mhm.
now out of the water, the sun's going down, it's getting colder, and we're getting cold.
Yep.
And so like at this point we got to kind of like decide what it is that we're going to do. So we ended up taking the canoe, and we put ourselves in like the next closest outlet, that we could find was for the like there's like I think it's a Methodist church that has like this little ramp that goes down to the river. And so we bring our 3 person canoe, now that we're up and dripping wet, and we bring it over to the side. And so at this point, like I'm following Ian and Vic's instructions because they have so much more experience on the water than I am, and they're like, Mike, you got to strip down. And I was like, all right, looks like I'm stripping down, because my clothes were all soaking
Yeah.
wet, and now that it's getting colder and colder and colder, I have a higher chance of catching hypothermia
Mhm.
if I'm wearing these cold wet clothes than if I'm in my boxers. And so that's what I did in the parking lot of this church. Now, of course, I went to the church to see if it was unlocked. Of course, it's not unlocked. And so I'm like, here I am in the parking lot of this church, and now at this point, the sun has gone down. We're
Mhm.
talking like 7:30 or so. By the time we're able to kind of like get ourselves there, my clothes are hanging over the trees, and it's getting colder and later, and so there I am, and while Ian and Vic went down and they paddled as fast as they could to be able to go down to be able to go down and like get the car and everything,
Mhm.
and the plan was for them to come and pick me up in the car, and so I had my phone, but there it's completely out of service. I've got no sort of
Yeah.
like service or anything like that. While they like fired down the Chattahoochee to go and get the car and then pick me up again,
Mhm.
and I'm like, I hope that they know the right church. I hope that they know where it is that they're going, because all I could do was I was just like jogging back and forth in this
Yeah.
parking lot to keep myself warm for Pat. I was there for like 45 minutes to an
Oh
hour,
man.
just back and forth while they ended up bringing their like getting all the way back down to the car, and then they came and picked me up as I was like shivering, and grabbed my clothes off of the tree, and I got back into the car. And I think Vic had some like blankets and stuff that were in his car that I was like wrapped up with, and anyways, and so there I am in the car and shivering, and then we made our way to the one place that we knew was going to be open, that we could get ourselves some coffee and get ourselves warm again, which was Waffle House. So we
Wow.
made our way to the closest Waffle House, and there I am. I end up like walking into the Waffle House. Ian had taken his own car, and I'm sure that the people that are listening to this at home are not as familiar with the movie I Spy as Pat and I am. But it's a movie that Pat and I have watched like countless times. It's this movie that came out in like the early 2000s. It's Owen Wilson and Eddie Murphy. It's a hysterical movie. I'm sure it gets like a 15 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not like a critically acclaimed movie, but there's a moment in that movie when there's like this plane. It's called the Switchblade, which is supposed to be able to like go invisible, and the heroes Owen Wilson and Eddie Murphy, after like saving the day, get themselves into this plane, and then they end up crashing into the river. And Eddie Murphy, who's this like boxer celebrity, is super pissed at Owen Wilson for like failing for like screwing up the mission. And that's how I felt, was walking into this Waffle House talking to like the Owen Wilson character in this movie. And Owen Wilson it was like Ian was like Owen Wilson, where in the movie Owen Wilson says like there was a nozzle failure, the intake manifold, it went all haywire, and he like, basically like the same thing. I walked in and I was like, Ian, so what happened? We weren't supposed to capsize. And he was like, I know, but we capsized like crazy, right? Like, and so there we are with our coffee, kind of like huddling together for warmth in our Waffle House. But it was definitely one of those things where it's like you didn't have control over your surroundings. But honestly, it was kind of a moment where I'm glad that like everything ended up going well, and that we were able to kind of like make our way out of that. Because like for those that are listening at home, know your waters before you get into them. If I hadn't been there with Ian and with and with Vic, it could have been a very different ending to the story. So like just like safety wise, and for those listening at home, just make sure that you know your waters is definitely kind of like a learning experience to kind of take away from it.
Wow.
But yeah, it does
Yeah.
always seem like things don't go according to plan. And whether you end up capsized in the Chattahoochee River, or pushing a deer for a half mile in a wheelbarrow that doesn't work, it's almost like these things tend to happen more often than not. But I think adaptability and being able to kind of like to being able to learn from those mistakes, kind of like we had said, Pat, I think that that's kind of where the learning and we've said so many times too that this is kind of like a lifelong trade and a lifelong love that you and I have, and I'm sure
Oh
that
yeah.
those that are listening at home have as well. And so it's kind of one of those things where you're not gonna your hunting career is not going to be made or broken by like one missed deer,
Oh
unless you
yeah.
let it. So, and
Absolutely.
like you got to kind of like learn from those things, and I think that that's part of kind of the journey, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing too, right? I mean, you make these mistakes, you learn from them, you get better for the next time, and ultimately you end up with a great story to talk about later too. So I mean, really, it's a win-win no matter what way you look at it. So yeah, no, I think we had some really great conversation here tonight. We got some really good stories here. I think we, learned a lot about what each other were doing. So I think it was a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
lots of storytelling in this one too, which is always something that I enjoy, both hearing those stories and also being able to kind of share some of those stories too. So thanks for this one, Pat. This was particularly fun for me. So
Oh
I
no,
really enjoyed this one.
yeah, absolutely. But I think we're at this point we pretty much run out of time. But as I said, great stories, and until next time, get outside, have some fun out there. Thanks for listening to the East Coast Hunt Fish Hike podcast. If you have questions, comments, or have an idea for an episode, feel free to follow us and reach out over social media. Don't forget to rate, review, or tell your friends about the podcast. And until you hear from us again, get outside, have some fun out there.